Hey everyone, it's Simi Shah, and welcome to Trailblazers. On this podcast, I dive deep into the journeys of trailblazing South Asians, sharing the stories of the leaders and dreamers lighting the way across the South Asian diaspora. Before we jump into today's episode, I have a quick message for you guys from My Decorify. Look, the older we get, the harder it becomes to find ways to unleash our creative energy. But with their curated DIY art kits, My Decorify brings your next adult home decor art project straight to your door. Head to mydecorify.com today to get your very own DIY kit or to check out their incredible South Asian-inspired notebooks and prints. And of course, use the code Trailblazers30 for 30% off your first order. Now on to our episode. Today on Trailblazers, I'm welcoming Shilpa Shah, co-founder and chief experience officer of Cuyana. Founded in 2011, Cuyana is a direct-to-consumer luxury fashion brand founded on the philosophy of fewer, better, and farm-to-table for fashion. Their goal? To encourage customers to invest in fewer but higher quality essentials. Over the past decade, the brand has become a favorite among celebrities like Aisha Curry and Purna Jagannathan, and grown to encompass 7 physical retail locations and over 150 employees. Before founding Cuyana, Shilpa began her career in information architecture, building web and mobile interfaces for multiple Fortune 500 companies like Disney, AT&T, and Sun Microsystems. She received her MBA from UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business, where she also completed her bachelor's degree in human-computer interaction and computer science. Shilpa is a mover and shaker in the new cohort of conscious and compassionate executives stewarding the future of consumer goods. And for that reason, I am so thrilled to have her join me today. Welcome, Shilpa.
Thank you, Simi, and what an intro. I appreciate that.
So I want to go way back to the beginning because human-computer interaction and computer science doesn't immediately make me think D2C fashion brand founder. Talk to me about what drew you to that field and the early parts of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I can even take it back to even before that. So in high school, I was passionate about layout and design and loved the editorial headline pages of a Harper's Bazaar. So I was always cutting out the headlines and taping them up in my room. Just loved the fashion world from that perspective, like the design perspective. And I loved advertising. So I was super interested in learning about those fields. And I did an advertising internship during college and hated it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I didn't like the fact that you were trying to understand how people thought just to only sell things to them. Maybe that was the Berkeley in me, but I needed it to actually mean more than that. And so was pretty disillusioned, came back from that internship and was already studying computer science and was doing my own major in kind of psychology and art history and perception. And then I landed in a user interface class and loved it. It brought together all of the aspects that I was studying, and it was designed with purpose, right? So you were actually designing to make things easier for people. Loved that. So fell in love with customer experience and realized that kind of was what I was studying this whole time. And there's just different applications of it. And so it's pretty interesting, that line, yes, computer science, yes, more on the digital side, and it doesn't really make sense on the fashion side. But if you think about it, customer journeys are a part of everything.
Of course.
So when Carla came to me with the idea of Cuyana, I had a similar reaction to you. I'm like, I'm not a fashion girl. This doesn't seem right. But I couldn't get it out of my head, right? Because the customer journey of it was amazing. There was offline, online, physical product, digital product, stores, retail, box experience. And so that was the part that really drew me to the Cuyana journey.
So you talk about how you fell in love with user interface and the world of design, and then eventually you graduate and you began a career in information architecture.
Yes.
For the uninitiated like myself, Can you walk me through what that role entails and talk about those early experiences you had?
Yeah, it was a totally new field. There weren't a lot of people working in that space when I graduated. And if you're confused, trust me, like everyone in my world was confused. But it's essentially like you can just imagine with the birth of the internet and all these websites, just how much information was out there that people had to organize and make it digestible for the consumer. So essentially, it was organization of that information so that people could find it as they navigated websites, digital devices, all those kinds of things. And it just dovetailed perfectly into the whole customer journey, user interface. And that same career actually has continued. It just became called different things. So an information architect is a UI designer, is a product manager eventually. I'm just older, so I'm part of the original set.
So clearly you were part of that turning point in evolution in even just the way these things were denominated. Can you speak to your early experiences working in the field at Disney and Sun Microsystems and all these places?
Yeah, absolutely. And I view it as a big blessing of my career that I was actually part of the first .com boom, right? So I graduated in 2000, San Francisco Bay Area, everything was on fire, just like everything was growing hand over fist, IPOs like every week. And then 2001 happened and pretty much everything turned for the worse, right? Or even at the end of 2000. So there were layoffs everywhere. What was the like kind of height of the bubble ended up in total demise and all these companies were going under. And that was fantastic for me, honestly. Like it taught me to be super resourceful, not to take stuff for granted and to really fight to be in this field. So my first job, I graduated with all this fanfare, like everyone wanted to recruit me. And very quickly, within 6 months, it all changed. But I found a field I was super passionate about. So I was trying to fight tooth and nail to stay in it. And so it took me all across California looking for different kind of jobs, worked in freelance, just trying to get my footing again until I landed at Disney. And all of the companies too, at that time, this field was new, right? So you're basically inserting yourself as a designer in between business people, graphic designers, and technology, right? And trying to prove that there's a space for you because you're the only one really. Well, I mean, everyone is always advocating for their consumer and user. That would be trite to say that you're the only one, but your sole job is to make sure that it's user friendly, right? Like that was my whole reason for being in the career, in the space, for my work every day. But that often can be combative, right? Like you're in the middle of all of these other fields that have been there for decades. They have a process in how they do it. And here I was, a woman of color, a designer, right? Inserting myself in the process, trying to understand what their business goals were, what the technology goals were, what the consumer goals were, what the design goals were, and trying to specify all the requirements as such to have the most successful outcome. It was a really tough time, but it was also amazing because once people saw that my value, my team's value was to make it actually more defined for them, easier, right? In so many ways, like somebody was actually taking ownership of defining what the experience was going to be, then they were so willing to engage. But the early days was definitely harder. And that's actually why I got my computer science degree, not to ever code, but in a room full of developers, which were mostly male, how was I going to hold my own? They took you more seriously. Yes. Yes, there are many a time where I was like, well, couldn't you just code it this way? And then you would see their minds be blown that they couldn't BS me, which was always a gratifying moment.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
It sounds very much like you were the common thread among various different pieces of the business.
Yes.
But at a time when this field wasn't respected. I mean, now you hear UI, UX designers coming out the wazoo in terms of job offerings, but it doesn't sound like it was that case when you were in the field.
And so many people left the field once the layoffs happened, right? So I don't think people really understood what a UI designer was until the iPhone came out. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, wow, this is so easy to use. You're like, yeah, that's what we do. Oh, okay. I understand what your discipline is now. Up until then, it was always something that the more invisible the interface, the better. Right? Like that means that you actually aren't thinking about using it. It kind of melts into the background. So nobody really talked about it until that point.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's super fascinating because now I feel like that's the first thing when there's a new product launch today. People are like, this is super user friendly. Yeah. This is extremely heavy lift. But before, to your point, it was more about how well can we camouflage this.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So You spend about a decade working in and around this space, and then in 2010, you go to business school. When does the interest in consumer goods and fashion start to develop? I know you met your co-founder, Carla, in business school, but was that your intent when you went to get your MBA?
I actually originally always thought I would get a master's in design. That's where my heart and passion was. But, it had been 10 years and I was hiring designers from those graduate programs that were reporting to me. And so when I took a hard look at my career, I'm like, what is it that I'm really missing? And I had a lot of design, I had technology, but the business side, I would hear the requirements from other people, but I didn't really understand that whole world. And so from my perspective, we would design all these great things. They'd go into a board meeting and they'd never come out again. And I'd be like, what happens in that room where all these good ideas go to die, right? Like they don't come out the other end. I'm so confused. Like, why do they have us working all-nighters on this stuff to only like kill the project?
Yeah.
So what I realized what I needed to do was actually go to business school. And also simultaneously, I was getting really tired of doing digital experiences, right? Like an interface could be anything. It could be a door handle.
Of course.
Right? Like that's an interface. And so I just got really like bored of always having this virtual perspective. So I literally went to business school because I didn't know what it was.
Wow.
I just knew, even in my interview, they asked me, why do you want to go to business school? And I drew a pie. And I said, here's the slice of the world I know. Here's the slice of the world I know I don't know. And then there's all this other stuff. And this seems like business school is going to help me understand. Like all the stuff I don't know, I don't know. It really did that. It was awesome.
Yeah. Wow. That's super interesting and a very refreshing take on the reason you went to business school. I feel like today people have a very cut and dry path as to why they're going and what they plan to do after.
Well, I think, and you talk about this theme a lot, right? I am a first generation Indian American. My grandfather was begging for 2 rupees a month to go to college, right? He got a 2 rupee scholarship. The other 2 rupees, he basically had to get charity. He went from India to Uganda. My dad was able to go to school in London. And then I'm growing up in America. And I'm like, I have an actual responsibility to do the most I could do with my career, right? So I could have been happy in that job. And in fact, my mom was very confused by that. She's like, wait, your husband just finished residency. Why are you going back to school? That doesn't make any sense. You have kids. Why would you do that? Like she actually said to me, and I did an Instagram post on this about you should be a woman of leisure. And when she said that to me, that just didn't make sense. It felt like my job was to actually push my boundaries because every generation before me had done the same. So that would be a total miss. Like I had all of this support for me to make something new. And I wasn't going to just settle for what was in front of me.
Yeah, absolutely. You preempted one of my questions because I read that post. And to recap it for our listeners, your mom told you after you visited Harvard's business school, I pray that you don't get in because she wanted you to focus on your family. You obviously did it anyway. And there were points in your life where you were barely sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night. You know, as someone who's now a co-founder, actively building a business, how have you strived to structure your life with such competing demands on your time, especially as a female founder?
So, I mean, I think it was also part of that whole journey of not knowing what it was, right? Like I took this leap. Carla, basically, she approached me with, hey, be an entrepreneur with me on a platter, right? She was like, hey, I don't care that you have a semester of school. I don't mind that you have 2 children, one of them being a newborn. I want you to join me in this because we had such a good relationship when we worked together in the past. And so I was like, how could I not take this opportunity? I'm intrigued by it. Carla and I have our best ideas in the shower. I was always thinking about it.
Same.
Right? So it wouldn't leave my mind. And I would call her after, every morning and be like, oh, what about this? And she's like, are you doing this with me? Like you keep on calling me.
That's
and
funny.
I couldn't get it out of my head. And so I jumped in, right? Like head first.
Yeah.
And then I wasn't one that was going to renege on my commitment. I was going to go all in, and I didn't know. I had no idea. And there were days where, I was barely keeping it together. And it was similar to the kind of the information architecture story. It's not the environment that it is now. Nobody was celebrating female founders then. It wasn't part of the dialogue or zeitgeist. Like we were very much alone, trying to figure all these things out. And, we were always one step ahead of the trend, which was hard. Like we were trying to launch a D2C business and develop our own brand with inventory when investors weren't excited about that. We were female founders, a minute before female founders were like celebrated, right? Like it was always like just a little bit earlier. Yeah. And it was really hard because my parents didn't understand, my in-laws didn't understand, my husband barely understood, right? Like, what are you doing? Like, from their perspective, you're selling hats and bags. I'm confused, But it was really hard, especially not having my family's support at the time.
There's so much to unpack there, but I want to start back at the beginning of the Cuyana journey because you talked about how it seems like things just clicked with you and Carla, but can you share a little bit about that Genesis story when you guys started talking about this? What were some of those initial steps you took to actually start this business?
So Carla and I, we met when she was in business school, but she was actually at Stanford 2 years ahead of me when I was at Berkeley. So I met kind of as a prospective student visiting her school. And so we just had a really great bond in the project we worked together. But on the Cuyana front, when we started talking about making a fashion brand, we really started at the meaning and what was missing for us in the world. For her, coming over from Ecuador in college and just being shocked by American consumerism, that was a very big part of the story. Like she was in shock about how we shopped in a disposable way.
Yeah, understandably.
Yeah. And for me, as she started to point out this behavior, because when you're living and growing up in an environment, you don't realize that there's another way. But then it brought back the stories of how my mom shopped in India, right? Or how my grandmother shopped, right? And it was different. And you were like, oh, right. Like in Indian clothes, we go and look at the silk. We look at the seam. We go look at the quality.
You feel the fabric.
Right.
Yep.
But in American clothes, we're like, oh, that's cute. And we just buy it, right? And we have no intention on how we're going to wear it. Like you're wearing it for a Friday night. Who knows if you're going to wear it again? Like, and so I was like, wow, like this is really interesting to me. Every step of the way, I mean, and this is still true today, is that the way we make and produce products is different. Because otherwise, why were we going to do it, right? Like Carla was a banker. She was at Goldman Sachs. She worked at Apple. She went to Stanford, right? She turned down Harvard. Like, I was coming from computer science. Like, I had a burgeoning career. I went to business school. Why would we spend all of our energy making something that already existed?
Absolutely.
So to us, it was always about making products mean something again, making those products that always made a woman feel beautiful, right? Whether it's the first time or the 50th time she's wearing it, and reinventing the same products that she has, right? Making her shop differently, changing her consumer behavior, which again was a step before anyone else talked that way. Like, there was no Marie Kondo when we started, right? Like, at least not in the American zeitgeist, right? So, we were also like, hey, you should buy less. And everyone was like, that's weird. So we were always, but like to us, it was like, hey, you guys have so much stuff you're not using. You should buy things with intention because it's the products you have are leaving you empty.
I find it really fascinating because the dots always connect backward, right?
Yeah.
With the rise of ESG, D2C, to your point, the elevation of female founders, that all seems very duh right now.
Right. Yep.
But I imagine it was a very lonely time for you guys coming up through this world, like you said, being a right step ahead, but still a step ahead of the trend and everyone else.
It was super lonely. And I was like the only one in the company that had children.
Yeah.
So like the realities of that, there's been a lot of storytelling about female founders, and it's hard no matter when you do it, but to do it with 2 young kids was, I don't know if I could do it again, to be honest.
Yeah.
I barely survived.
Well, power to you. And thank you for being candid about that, because it's important for young women to understand that and to hear that.
Yeah, I would be the one who shouts it from the rooftops. I don't know if this journey is for everyone.
Yeah.
It's easy to see success, but 90% of entrepreneurs don't make it.
Yeah, they fail. Absolutely. So I'm curious, you guys decide to go all in on this. You're calling Carla after you have these inspired shower thoughts. How did your experience in tech and specifically design and UI shape the early days of Cuyana?
So between Carla and I, and this is what made us such good partners, we could do every role in the company.
Wow.
I designed the first 4 Cuyana websites, right? Like I was up on the phone with our development team overseas, like every night, right? I would basically put the kids to bed. I would stare at the wall for an hour just to like reset my brain. And I would like work on stuff for the business. Then I would fall asleep on the couch around 10 or 11. I'd wake up at 3, and then I would connect with our overseas development team until the kids were up at 6, basically on rotation, like every day. But I could do the website, I could design the customer experience, I could help with the brand and the storytelling, all of the sales part of making a business like ours, I could do. And then Carla oversaw all of the product, right? All of the finances, like the brand story, the vision. She understood all the fashion side much better than me. She would oversee supply chain. And so between her and I, we basically could do every role, you know? So now when we hire an employee, we're like, look, we understand that this is hard. We've done it, right? Like, you know, we'd be on a supplier trip sourcing products and at night writing customer service emails, coming back and packing boxes, right? Like we did all of that ourselves. So all of these parts of our toolkit, if you will, right? Like those 10 years of me working in the space and different users, different consumers, right? Like I was able to run the user research study, like what resonated with people, all of those aspects. And then all of Carla's experience, everything you ever do comes to bear in a situation like that. It's truly, I mean, people always say like, that's the best business school. You learn everything, right? Like social media.
Absolutely.
All the way to how do you pose in front of a camera? Like who knew that was part of the entrepreneur role, right? Like, but you know, apparently for female founders, you have to also like be really good at those elements too, right? So
yeah, I'm curious in that vein, given that both of you had so much expertise in these various moving parts of the business, was it hard when it came time for you guys to finally delegate that and bring people on and let go of some of that control?
Yes, very hard. Especially since Carla's very detail-oriented, and that's what's beautiful about the Cuyana brand. It's not a 90% brand, it's a 100% brand. The devil's in the details, right? It's in the nuances. And so nobody could quite get that like she could. And how we communicate with our customers, that was really important to me, right? So these were really hard things to let go, but you realize the issue or the challenge isn't only in letting go, it's really in defining what you want so that other people feel empowered to actually take it further, right? So to really like documenting that. So we have had the opportunity to meet so many women that are just incredible along the way. And Julie Rice is someone that is just such an inspiration for us and how she did develop the SoulCycle brand, right? And she would basically tell us like brand is something that's intrinsic to you, right? To you and Carla and how you guys carry that. And so she had people follow her around as she made decisions and write it all down so that they could then look at that playbook. It was really just about getting it out of our heads and onto paper so that other people could help us further the mission.
Super interesting. So typically a co-founder would assume a role like COO, but you took on the role of CXO. Can you walk me through that decision and what exactly that entails?
Yeah, it basically was everything that touched our customer. And given that the customer journey for Cuyana was paramount, we're a D2C brand because we wanted to own the customer journey, not because we were trying to make a different economic proposition. Does that make sense? So essentially most D2C brands make product largely the same way. They sell it direct to consumer and just give it to you at a better price. Cuyana blew up everything about how products were made. Then we distributed direct to consumer and we wanted to change how it was delivered. So before D2C companies were talking about stores, we had one, right? Because part of the customer journey is how do you then deliver it to the customer? And that was the part that I was obsessed with. And also where my strengths were, right? Like I wasn't going to be, I mean, I guess in the digital side, a lot of people include that in operations, but you know, I had to also play to what I was good at, right? And Carla recognized that too. And so we were always able to find other resources to help with the operations side. To us, it was about making a beautiful experience for women from the way that the product was made, delivering that with meaning, and connecting it all the way to how she wears it. Like that story of product doesn't stop with how it's made, right? Like it's also the stories she has when she's wearing it. And that's really what our focus was, like to make a different kind of brand. But I will tell you, it's really hard, right? Because we have to do all of it. Right. So we actually, even at Cuyana, pack and ship every box. It's a Cuyana employee. We didn't use a 3PL. And so owning all of that is really hard, but also really fulfilling.
Yeah. Well, now it adds up as to why you're a CXO and not a typical COO.
Yes.
So you've been working on this, again, for the better part of 10 years, and you talked about how hard it was, especially being the mother of 2 young kids. Did you ever have any I want to give up moments?
I definitely did. There was a conversation that Carla had a year after we got started together. You know, everything kind of at home was falling apart. My husband and I were in counseling. Like my kids were really struggling. I got the full gamut of what I had committed to and what the role was going to take. And then what happened was a real just blessing. Like we found really good help, right? Like somebody who just changed our world. And so once she came and helped us with things that like we just didn't realize was like weighing on us, like buying toothpaste, doing laundry, like all of those things, like all the balls that I used to juggle, but I was dropping left and right, helping with food, all of those kinds of things. Like I realized, oh, wow, I could do this. Really, like everything at home was okay. Me and my husband were like, after she entered our life, we were like, oh, like, do we need to go to this session for therapy? I'm like, I'm good. And he's like, I'm good. I'm like, so it just turned out like we just needed help with laundry. Who knew? Yeah. You know? So I'm a big believer in setting up your life so that you have the support and outsourcing whatever you can, right? So because all of the home stuff was outsourced, when I got home at 6, being home from 6 to 8 to be with the kids, I could just be with the kids, right? Yeah. Like that was the huge kind of trigger that let me keep going. And I had to just keep on changing the mile marker. Like, okay, you can do this another year. This is the commitment you made. And every year it just got better and better, easier and easier to manage. Yeah. It also helped when you start getting successful and people start realizing.
I was about to say, I mean, congratulations, because clearly you've done it. But to that end, I mean, your brand has achieved considerable prominence. You've had collaborations and partnerships with Ayesha Curry, Bruna Jagannathan, among so many others. And D2C fashion is not an easy space to thrive in. Was there a moment when you felt like you'd struck gold finally?
So that's it's a question, like, are we successful? And you always have the next goal.
Of course.
But I think it's when you come across a customer and you introduce yourself and then they ask you, like, they're like, are you the co-founder of Cuyana? And you're like, oh, yeah, actually, yeah. Well, yes, I am. And they just rave about your brand and they tell you what you've worked so hard to infuse into it, right? Because a brand, what is a brand? It's just a word, right? Like when you start, and then it doesn't have all this emotional kind of these attributes. And so when somebody's actually repeating it back to you, then you're like, oh, wow. Even if Cuyana was to go away, like we made a difference here. We made something different than everyone else. So it's a combination of the customers and the suppliers, honestly. Like the moments, of course, the celebrity moments, all of those are amazing. Because we didn't have a single connection in the game, right? So like I actually tapped Jessica Alba on the shoulder to like meet her years ago. Now she's like a dear friend. So like to be able to tell that is amazing. But it comes more from like the product and the brand we've made, and it feels good when that's recognized by every type of individual. But I don't know. I realized a while ago that success cannot be tied to a revenue number. Right? Or it can't be tied to a number at all. Like it can't be tied to the number of stores, the number of rounds we've raised, the amount of money we've made. And it really has to be tied to whatever your personal goal was at the start and defining that really up front. And for me, my personal goal, and I think it's different for every founder, was to make something out of nothing, to really push myself to see what I was capable of. Like, Simi, ultimately, like when we look back at our lives, are we going to have regret or not? And I can say professionally, I will not have any regret. Like I pushed myself to my ultimate limit, and that's success.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's very powerful because in concert with the brand Cuyana, so much of what we've been taught, especially in America, is materialistic success, quantifiable success.
Yeah.
So I think putting something that's attaches a bit more of sentiment to it is something that more of us should be doing. So
Yeah.
I think that that's a really interesting way of defining success. Cuyana itself, of course, is rooted in the now business imperative that is ESG, or at least business imperative that's getting there, with an emphasis on environmental impact. But
Yeah.
you're going against the tidal wave that is fast fashion. Have you faced backlash from the industry or competitors, and what has that been like?
I wouldn't call it backlash. The hardest part for us is really the noisiness of the space and the greenwashing. So that when people use all of these really meaningful, idealistic goals, right? Like mission-driven goals as marketing. I think that's what's really hard because Guyana's always been a humble brand. We want the consumer to feel it. We don't want to hit her over the head with all of these messages. We've never used our supply chain as part of our marketing before, right? And people always asked us, like in year 1, year 2, the label wasn't sustainable. It was fair trade or organic, or it was always a label. And there's a problem with labels, right? Like, is Cuyana sustainable? It's a good question. Absolutely. We are on that journey, but it's an evolving goal, right? It's not a destination, right? So we can always become more sustainable. So what does that mean? And so we never loved the black and white nature of labels. Cuyana, the sustainable brand. Are we sustainable? Yes, that's something we can own. So I think that competitors, like when you see H&M have a give back program, is it as meaningful as Guyana's give back program? And you start going down there in your mind and like, did you inspire it? Should you get credit for it? And then you realize, oh my God, H&M has a give back program. We've actually encouraged H&M to think differently about this. And ultimately, isn't that our goal? So as long as people are doing things as action, I think it's positive. But when they're using it as marketing to confuse consumers, then I get concerned, right? Like it's really hard as a consumer to navigate that. And so we're trying to really help her and say, okay, this is what sustainability means to us. And at the heart of fewer better is buying things you use. If we can do that, we make such a big impact, right? Like stop buying things you won't use.
Yes.
And then we can talk about, okay, here are all the nuances in sustainability. Organic doesn't necessarily mean good. Biodegradable, if it's only going to last 2 wears versus 1,000, which one's better for the environment? We should have those conversations because it's not a black and white thing.
No, I find that interesting also because it is a moving target, even just the way we speak about it. I mean, I remember when we were talking about CSR, corporate and social responsibility, and now it's transformed to ESG. Do we use eco-friendly versus sustainable, to your point? Right. And so I think the minute you reduce it to labels, it becomes not consumer friendly, which is obviously the crux of so much of what you do. Yeah, and it's an important way for businesses to consider their path forward in this space.
And ultimately, that's what we used to rely on brands for.
Yeah.
Brands used to mean that if I buy this brand, it's going to have this quality, this kind of level of price point. It's going to mean these things emotionally. These are their values, right? Yeah. And so we really think that we've bastardized brands. Yeah. Brands, they've compromised themselves in so many ways. And so Cuyana, and that's like what we want it to mean, and Cuyana means to love. We want a brand that you love and can marry again, right? Like that when you buy Cuyana, you know that it's made with respect and integrity, and we've achieved the highest possible sustainability that we can, that we have chosen materials that are going to last twice as long because they're twice the level of quality. Absolutely. All of those things go into that name, so that as a consumer, you feel empowered again, that we're not going to compromise on the values that you care about. Because otherwise, it's too hard to be a consumer in this day and age.
It's extremely hard.
And fashion's supposed to be fun. Like if I have to research for 5 hours before I buy a shirt, like to really do it responsibly, like, God, I don't want to buy that shirt anymore. You know, like it's like, so we're trying to make it really enjoyable too. Like that Guyana's taking care of all those things for you.
It's great to hear. I feel like that challenge has also become increasingly more of an issue post-COVID. And as I'm sure you well know, being a business rooted in supply chain, COVID certainly hit a lot of businesses hard, including yours. You had to let members of your team go. What were the big challenges and how did you navigate them? How are you continuing to navigate them?
Yeah, and it has not been dull. Every year there's like a new batch of these challenges. Yeah. You know, it was the hardest day of our company's life, hands down. Like Cuyana is made up of the people who bring that brand to life. And we always underhire because we want to make sure that we're sustainable there, right? Sustainability to us is to sustain. And so if we're going to give someone a job offer, right, a commitment, we want to be able to sustain their job. And so having to face that reality that we weren't able to do that was really hard, but it was the only way that we could sustain the company. So, you know, we had to make that really tough choice. But then within that choice, we were able to really still map to our values. We didn't cancel a single supplier order because we knew that America had more options to take care of people than they do maybe in Ecuador or Peru or overseas, right? Like it was a very intentional decision. The hard part is that we like to be planned. We like to know what's happening. We like to be able to have visibility at least as much as we can. And every day it's just something new. From first the pandemic and store closures to global supply chain and labor shortage and inflation. And, you know, like every day is a challenge. And I think what we can say is that as long as we don't sacrifice our integrity, that we can look back and have pride in the decisions we made. That's the only thing that we can guarantee right now.
Absolutely. Well, power to you, and I hope it continues to get easier, if anything.
Yes. Please, make it stop, Simi. Make it stop. Yeah. Talk to the world.
That's why we're recording this right now. But right before COVID, in 2019, you guys closed a $30 million round of financing from HIG Capital, and it's, as we've talked about, no secret that only 2% of venture dollars still go to women today. Yeah. What has your fundraising experience been like?
Fundraising is hard no matter who you are when you do it. I don't want to diminish all the men out there and the rounds that they've raised. It's a really hard process, right, to convince investors of anything. They're trained to say no. They're looking to say no, right? So to overcome that hump is really hard. I think the hardest part for us was they didn't understand what we were trying to do, right? So they just weren't the consumer. So the hardest part is that there aren't enough venture capital partners that are women that identify with stories and problems that women are facing. And so you spend so much time trying to convince them there's an issue that you can't even get to the intelligent part of your presentation. If we spent half an hour of the Cuyana pitch telling you, no, the quality out there is really bad, right? And all they see are like, but there's a plethora of handbags. Like, I don't get it, right? I do not understand. Like, women do not have shortage of consumer product options. And they're right. Yeah. But you're like, but all of them are not delivering value. And when they don't understand that, you're never going to get to the intelligent part of the supply chain model and how we're going to do inventory and demand forecasting. And so I think that's where a lot of the real challenge was. So and maybe I'm a little against the grain here. Like, yes, we had those investor experiences. Trust me. I mean, there was an investor who actually touched Carla's leg during a meeting. Really bad. Like the amount of harassment. But those are few and far between. I don't believe the venture community is trying to be anti-women. Or not give women money.
I agree.
You know, I just think they have a huge fiduciary responsibility. They have to deliver returns. And if they're not convinced by the problem, they're not going to put their money there. Yeah. But the issue is that they need more representation and more voices to understand a more diversity of problem.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the conversations I've had on Trailblazers with female founders like yourself, and many of whom are innovating for the South Asian community, are like, people don't know how to size this market. They don't understand the market. They don't understand the behaviors of the consumer we're trying to cater to. So we can't even get past that first point, like you said, to go deeper into how we're actually solving the problem.
Exactly.
So I think there's a ways to go. And like you said, hopefully will come with more representation from the capital provision side itself.
Yeah. And it actually has to start at the LP level. Like, who are they giving money to, right? And so I'm really encouraged. I know A friend of mine, Jacqueline Johnson, just like has a new LP, New Money Ventures, and it's all towards giving it to women, right? Because that's the space she understands. And so that's starting from a female LP to a female VC to female founders. And that's what we have to see more of, right? South Asian LPs, now that we have that caliber in this country, give to South Asian venture.
Of course.
To have a focus and mission on South Asian founders.
Yes.
I'm encouraged that the next generation of these financial executives will have that vision. Because it's also lucrative. I mean, that's the thing. Like, ultimately,
we're good founders.
Right? Like, that's the Cuyana business model. Like, we're sustainable because it makes financial sense, too, to not have waste. Yeah. The more you can align the business opportunity with the values you have, then the better off everyone is.
Absolutely. Something that I found interesting that you guys did, and ironically, I was living in Boston back in 2019, 2020, and I remember when you guys were opening your Boston store, and I was actually supposed to come to your opening, and I was stuck at work, as many of us are when we work in finance. But, you know, I was amazed that you guys were opening a brick and mortar location at a time when that was gaining some prominence with D2C brands, but still wasn't quite that popular. What prompted that decision?
Because if you're selling product that's even better in person, we had nothing to lose with that. Yeah. You have a firsthand experience telling a story in a beautiful environment that represents your brand, where a woman can actually see, touch, wear it. We couldn't find the negative. If we could come up with really good lease structures that have flexibility, that allowed us to test. Like, so we had all of those like parameters as part of it too. Yeah. We didn't sign bad leases. But if we could do all that, why wouldn't you do it? Yeah. I mean, and also like by the numbers, Simi, I mean, you're a numbers girl, so you know, when we started Cuyana, e-commerce penetration was at 8 or 9%.
Sure.
So if 90% of the market is shopping offline,
that's where you need to be.
And we're already foregoing wholesale distribution, why wouldn't we take advantage of that 90%? Right? So like, it just didn't ever make sense to us when, D2C founders would go on the record saying like, oh, I'll never open a brick and mortar. We're like, that's dumb. Yeah. Like go meet the customer where they are.
Yeah. It seems like there's so much intention and research and data behind the decisions you guys make. You have such an array of products, but I know it started with the iconic leather tote. How have you sought to expand that suite of products? How do you approach that intention within your product line, especially with your sell-through rate being close 90%. To 90%, I believe. Yeah.
Through understanding our consumer, it's why we don't design for men. If you think from a business perspective, think about the men's market, easy category, like make Cuyana for men. But from the branding perspective, it's different. And we don't understand what men need necessarily, right? So like, until we get that expertise, like we'll be shooting in the dark a little. And so like for us, Cuyana wants white Gap products for women to make them feel beautiful, powerful, that make them feel intelligent for shopping it, that's versatile, that has gorgeous design behind it, all of those things, right? So many parameters. Yeah. And we are that consumer, right? That leather tote, what bag were you carrying when you, before that existed, there was no bag that allowed us to put our laptop in it.
Yeah.
We needed products that worked for the modern woman. That's who we are.
Of course.
So it's really been, what else fills out her core closet? Okay, we want something that adds more fun so that I can still wear it forever if I choose to, but feels a little bit more on trend. Yeah. So right now, the puff sleeves are amazing, right? Because that's what you want.
Yes, I'm a fan.
Yeah. So like adding a little bit of that so that you can reinvent your wardrobe, but 80% of it are still things that are timeless and forever, right? And even that puff sleeve shirt, the way we're going to do it is in a way that you can still wear it forever.
Yeah, I love that. So I remember in some of your early articles, the message was farm to table, but for fashion, and that has since evolved into the fewer, better philosophy. What are the ways in which you try to embody that in your day-to-day life?
Personally or in the company?
Both.
So fewer, better is fundamentally about intention and priority. Setting your intention on what and how you're going to use something before you do it. And then when things come in the way is prioritizing as you go. So like from the company perspective, how many goals can we actually execute on? If we can't do them well, then we shouldn't do as many, right? So like it's fewer, better goals. Within my personal life, how many things can I actually take on to live the way that I want to live, right? And so it's always kind of that same process. What are our priorities as a family? For our family, having my kids see me cook at home is important to me. It's not because I'm a South Asian woman. I want them to have that. I like to cook. I put love into the food. So how do I set up my life that I could do that on repeat? I write down everything I've ever made because I think the hardest part is like, what should I make this week? And I show it to the kids. And then I say, okay, here's everything I've ever made. What do you want?
I love that.
And then I grocery shop according to that. So then I know, like, I just take out the guesswork of, okay, what is my priority going to be? So that it maps to the value. So if the values are simple and fewer and really create a better life, then you can execute those on in many ways. And there might be weeks that I don't want to do it. So I don't do it.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't take it away, right? Like I'm also like reprioritizing because for me that week, the priority may be different. But in aggregate, I've accomplished that goal. So I think it's just always that reframing that really is at the heart of that sentiment.
Yeah. I really love that because it feels like you very much live your brand. And it helps people like me internalize what you're building even more. There seem to be small ways in which both you and Carla fused cultural elements into Cuyana, beginning with the name itself and extending to products like your Rat Ki Rani signature candle.
Yeah.
How has your heritage manifested over the course of your building this company?
It's a great question. I think you're going to see even more from us in the next couple years, like dedicated to that. It's in everything we do. And honestly, the main point is like, and how much the material has meant to both Carla and I.
Yeah.
Right? Like the base level. And the Indianness comes out because what is India without its silk? What is India without its pashmina? Like it's all of those things. And can we get back to that product materiality? And if we could get back to that for India, can we get back that for every country, right? Like why does made in China mean less than made in Italy? It's not because China's inherently less good at their craftsmanship. It's just that we've bastardized what that meaning is. And so our heritage, it may not be as direct of a line to say, oh, Shilpa's Indian, so she made a candle inspired by a flower she loves from growing up, which I also love those direct attachments to. But really our culture's in every element of how we make product first and foremost and how we respect our suppliers, right? Like we call them, where they're on WhatsApp, we share family photos. Like it's in those elements that you feel that cultural heritage, like there's a respect there. And it's one of the words we use all the time. Like we respect the people who make our products. We respect our customers. And to me, Indian culture is so much about respect. And so it infuses itself in so many ways. There's no way Cuyana would be the company it is today without heritage. But it's not always an obvious one.
Well, I'm super excited to see what more comes out with respect to that. And we'll plan to buy some myself. The last question I have for you today is, as someone who's been on this journey and faced highs and lows, what advice do you have for aspiring South Asian female founders?
I think it's really about knowing why you're doing what you're doing. So applying that same fewer better mentality that I spoke about is like really, really documenting what your passion is. What are the things that you won't compromise no matter what? And then when everybody, because everybody will ask you to compromise, whether it's because they want you to stay at home more, or they want you to work more, whatever it may be, that you come back to why you're doing it. I think it's really easy for a South Asian woman, and then adding the founder part, to lose herself in it. And even now, like maybe examples like me are inspiring, but also maybe they're oppressive to her, right? Like I'm conscious of that. Have I done a service or a disservice by starting a company with 2 kids? Am I sending a message to other women that if they don't start a company while they have 2 kids, that they've somehow failed?
But it's interesting because men would never ask themselves this question.
I don't think they would. So the biggest advice is, how are you keeping yourself at the forefront of this? Where are you in this conversation about how your family lives and the tradition or the culture of what everybody else has a demand on you? Where is your voice and what do you want in it? And if you can do that, if you can write that down. And for me, it was singularly about like that story I told you about my grandfather, and that I knew that for my life, I would have regret. You know, I have a dear friend. Sometimes when we get on the phone, she's like, I'm like, oh, so what's going on? She's like, Shilps, there's nothing new. And I'm like, but why are we as a society thinking that there has to be something new? Like, are you happy? Yeah. Yes, that's great. You know, like tell me what's making you happy. Tell me about the little things. It doesn't have to be like this flashy new thing, right? Like this is a disservice I think we do to each other. So how do we hold ourselves in mind? Yeah. If you could do that, like you'll be successful across every element of your life, founder or not.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'll be honest, I mean, I think it's one of the most unique pieces of insight that anyone has shared to date, which is just a testament to who you are very clearly. So thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to share this with our community and so excited to keep on watching you build Cuyana.
Thank you. It was so nice to meet you, Simi. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode. If you want to get new episodes straight to your inbox, subscribe to our newsletter at southasiantrailblazers.com and follow us at South Asian Trailblazers on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.